In the last 90 minutes, we've witnessed a political bombshell in the making. Former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, vice chairwoman of the January 6th Select Committee and the most public-facing member of arguably the most conservative Republican dynasty in America, who earlier this week endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, has gone even further, this time saying that she and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, will do something that, if you're even casually a follower of American politics, might think would mean hell has frozen over. Dick Cheney is voting for the Democratic nominee for president. Dick Cheney is voting for Vice President Kamala Harris. Here she is in conversation with The Atlantic's Mark Leibovich, making this news a short time ago in Austin, Texas.
Dick Cheney, your father, a beloved figure among Democrats for many, many years. Do you... if you know who he will be supporting or who he'll be voting for, do you care to share with us who he might be voting for?
Dick Cheney will be voting for Kamala Harris.
Okay. Wow. Words I never expected to hear.
Yeah. You know, if you think about the moment that we're in, and you think about how serious this moment is. You know, my dad believes, and he's said publicly, that there's never been an individual in our country who is as grave a threat to our democracy as Donald Trump is, and that's the moment that we're facing.
I'm going to show you all the news that Liz Cheney made because there's a lot more. But I want to stop here. I worked for Dick and Liz Cheney, and what Dick Cheney just did and what Liz just announced is he made it impossible. Made it impossible for the Rob Portmans and the Chris Christies and the George W. Bushes and the Bill Barrs to sustain their position that somehow, in some universe, Kamala Harris is worse than Donald Trump or writing someone in or doing nothing. But Liz Cheney, the Cheneys went further. Liz Cheney is also endorsing the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in Texas, Congressman Colin Allred, over Republican Ted Cruz. Allred will join our program in a little bit to react to this endorsement. It's where we start today with some of our favorite friends. Former RNC spokesman, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller's here with us. Also joining us, Democratic pollster to tell us what the Democrats do with all of this. Cornell Belcher's here with me at the table, the president of the National Action Network, the host of Politics Nation right here on MSNBC. The Reverend Al Sharpton's here, and former top prosecutor at the Department of Justice, Andrew Weissman's back with us. Lucky for us, all of them MSNBC contributors. Tim Miller, your thoughts?
Well, Nicole, I mean, in some ways, obviously, this is a shock. It's an earthquake. Dick Cheney, Darth Vader, voting for the Democrat. Should be a wake-up call to everybody. In other ways, it's not that much of a surprise because of what we've seen from Liz Cheney and just the backbone from the Cheneys. I want to go back to Dick cut an ad for her in her primary that she lost to a MAGA Republican when she was sacrificed at the altar of Donald Trump's insurrection by the Republican Party. And in that ad, he said, in our nation's 246-year history, there has never been an individual that was a greater threat to the Republic than Donald Trump. There's nothing more important that Liz will ever do than lead the effort to make sure Donald Trump is never again near the Oval Office, and she will succeed. I mean, that's as straightforward as it gets. That is classic Dick Cheney. You know, if love him or hate him, he always was clear-eyed about what he thought was the right approach. And in this case, Dick Cheney is looking at this and saying Donald Trump is as the greatest threat in the history of the Republic. I mean, that is not mincing words. So I agree with everything you said in the intro. I think this is huge news. It also means we should mention that now the last two Republican VPs will not be voting for Trump. And Mike Pence is neutral, I guess. And Dick Cheney is, so Donald Trump's own VP is not voting for him. And then the previous Republican VP is voting against him. I think that's pretty telling. And then I think it's worth sitting with something you said in the intro there. Condoleezza Rice, just to pick one example, was on Fox News earlier this week trying to do this two-step where she said, there are four horsemen of the apocalypse coming: isolationism, protectionism, nativism, and populism, and we need to fight against them. and she's on Fox, but she doesn't say Trump's name like he's Voldemort or something. And it's like, well, who are you talking about with those 4 threats? You know, if you think things are perilous, which was her words, and you think things those 4 threats are causing peril to the republic, and your colleague in the Bush cabinet thinks that one of the candidates is the greatest threat to our republic, well, then what is the obvious next step? And it's very refreshing that Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney have made the obvious next step, and I hope some other colleagues of theirs follow in their footsteps.
Well, I mean, not to talk out of school, but the construct is George W. Bush's. He writes about it in Decision Points, and he's privately, since before he left the presidency, worried about those threats. But the horses aren't headless, you know. I mean, the head on all 4 horses, Tim, is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is galloping through not just the Republican Party, but the world, cozied up to Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un. And I think the question for all of them, wherever they go, is what's the difference between how you see the world and how Dick and Liz Cheney see the world? There is no, I attest, there is no ideological difference between Condoleezza Rice's worldview as it pertains to Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban and Dick and Liz Cheney. So the difference is, the variable is somewhere else, right?
Yeah. The variable is the courage to speak honestly, right? And to deal with the blowback that the Cheneys have dealt with and others have dealt with. Deal with the fact that Liz Cheney lost her seat, lost her spot in leadership. Deal with the fact that you don't get invited onto Brett Baer's show, I guess, if you say the words that it's Donald Trump who is the one that is the threat at the head of all these horses. And I should say one other thing. I guess one rationale that some of those folks might have given to say why they're different than Dick and Liz in the past was that Trump would have people that were more aligned with them around him. But the other big news story this week is we've learned again, it's been confirmed again, that actually Trump has the most isolationist and the most dangerous people around him now this time. I mean, he chose J.D. Vance to be his VP at the advice of Tucker Carlson. Among a couple of other isolationists, Tucker, who was platforming a neo-Nazi, a historian, supposed historian that says that Churchill is the bad guy in World War II, and we know that J.D. Vance has been out there saying he doesn't care about the Ukrainians, he doesn't care about them. So like that is going to be his inner circle next time. A bunch of people that are anathema in their view of the free world and America's role in the world, anathema to the view of internationalists and the kind of bipartisan national security consensus since World War II. So we know now that there will not be other people around him that are more amenable to the Condi Rices of the world. So what is it? So now we know what the choice is. It's Kamala Harris, who's in line with the bipartisan national security consensus. You might disagree with some policy specifics, or it's Donald Trump, who is a threat to it and a threat to our republic, as Dick Cheney said.
I don't want to beat a dead horse. Well, so many horse. I didn't mean to make another horse reference, but what you just said is so vital. Dick Cheney's foreign policy views are what alienated him from all of the Democratic Party and large swaths of the Republican Party. It's what ushered in Donald Trump. And that Dick Cheney sees the world and sees America's enemies like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un and Hamas and the threat of terrorism and the threat, economic threats from China and whatnot, more like Kamala Harris does than anything that Donald Trump will do prospectively, is a political and ideological earthquake that is being felt and being reported out all around the world. Cornell Belcher, I have never covered a Republican making the move into the pro-democracy coalition without giving credit to the Democratic Party and the Democratic pro-democracy coalition for having all of us. What do they do with Dick Cheney?
Look, Nicole, I am completely gobsmacked because I got to tell you, many, many years ago, I would have never in a million years thought I'd be sitting here one day talking about Dick Cheney and the Cheneys endorsing a Democratic nominee. That's how incredibly our world has changed over the last couple of years as with the rise of Donald Trump. Look, I don't have to tell you this, but I think I want to sort of lean into with our viewers what a big freaking deal this is. There's probably not there's very few more iconic conservative names over the last 2 decades than the Cheneys, right? You know, and Lord knows we could disagree, and certainly disagree with Dick Cheney on a lot of policy and policy issues, but we don't think of him as someone who's not patriotic and loves this country and fights for democracy and what he believes about America, right? So he was a vice president, a Republican vice president, and their family is now leaning into support for a Democrat. That is an incredible moment in history, because we've not seen the likes of this in our modern history. And I've grown cynical. I think we've actually talked about this on the show before. I think I've grown cynical about how much endorsements matter or move people. I think in the last 2 decades, just in my mind, I think there's a couple endorsements that moved the ball that were impactful. And it was actually one of them was another Republican, because I think it was Secretary, the late great Colin Powell, who endorsed Barack Obama. I thought that was an impactful and meaningful endorsement. And then primaries, when Senator Ted Kennedy endorsed Obama, I think it was a needle moving moment for again Obama. I think this is a needle moving moment, I think, for Vice President Harris, because there's, as you know, there's a lot of Republicans been sitting out on the fence, and we've been talking about permission structure. Yeah. Nicole, what bigger permission structure for conservatives to lean in and vote for the pro-democratic movement than Liz and Dick Cheney offering up the sort of permission structure and the proof points for it. I think it's huge. If I were the campaign, I would literally be running television ads with the Cheneys and talking about bipartisanship and talking about something bigger than left versus right, but something bigger about America.
President Biden spent his life in government. Just about everybody knows that. When Democrats began eyeing Kamala Harris as his replacement, Republicans rushed to question her government experience and her competence. Let me remind you, Donald Trump put out the word that she was, quote, too inexperienced. And from there, the headlines came in, Republicans claiming she was not only inexperienced, lacking credentials, unqualified. Some said she was the most unqualified candidate around. You can see the reports hitting the supposed inexperience. The basic MAGA attack here is on experience. And then some of them mix it in with a claim that she was not only inexperienced, but somehow only rising as a kind of inexperienced, unqualified diversity pick. They are empirically wrong. This is false, and I'm going to explain why. But to remind you what we're talking about here is some of what the right has been pushing.
This woman is not qualified or capable of having the nuclear codes.
Has never had a real job in her life. She's not capable of leading the country.
I think she was a DEI hire.
Completely obsessed with identity over actual competence, experience, or results.
Incapable and unqualified person to be president.
Unqualified to be our country's commander-in-chief.
She's just not ready.
All right. Those are factual claims. I've told you before, everyone has not only the right, but really the obligation to debate all of our views, opinions, and preferences in the campaign. But those are claims about her experience in government and her qualifications to lead in government. They're about facts, not opinions. And they are all wrong. And they're not only factually wrong, but glaringly so compared to most presidential nominees, and especially compared to recent Republican ones. And so I'm going to show you the facts in our special report right now, because this matters and the facts matter. And this is also a campaign topic, and they are attacking her for it. And you might hear about it at the debate. And if they are attacking her about things that are false, and I've told you about the danger of disinformation and propaganda in our democracy, well, we want to give you the facts. This is something, the kind of report you might want to remember or even share. I'll let you decide that. But let me show you why the voices you just heard are either wrong and ignorant of basic civics, or worse, aware of all that and being deceitful about Harris. The facts show presidential nominees typically have some experience in elected government. In the modern era, you could go to JFK and Reagan. In their first White House runs as nominees, the point that Harris is at now, these are the facts. They each had about 13 and 18 years in elective office. For JFK, Congress. For Reagan, governor, as you see. And voters could see that at the time. That was during their first run for president, and they knew they had that background of experience. It wasn't their whole adult career, it was a slice of it. Now, Obama had less time in national office, and people discussed that in his first run. He was running for president during the first Senate term. He'd also served in state office, so he had about 11 years total. After that, of course, you have Donald Trump, who had 0 years in elected office when he ran. Now, Trump was unusual in so many ways, and that is one where it was known at the time, but he claimed that coming in fresh was a positive. It was good he didn't have experience, he said, and he ran against the swamp, and you could make that argument. That kind of inexperience itself, though, was a first in all of American history. Every other president at the same point in time in this chart, their first run for office as the nominee, had elective or military experience. As one headline put it, Donald Trump is the only president ever with no political or military experience, running the government with no government experience. Those are recent presidents in both parties, with pre-White House experience ranging from the unusual 0 to that high of around a decade. So how does Harris compare? Well, here are your facts tonight. Kamala Harris, we'll put this in full, has more experience than all of them by a lot. And I'm going to leave this up for you because you have a lot of different numbers and historical comparisons, but this is the factual antidote to the falsehoods, misinformation, or possibly lies I showed you from Fox and MAGA. Not only does she have more experience than all of these other presidents during their first White House run as a nominee, but she doubles most of them. She's served in elected government positions for 21 years straight and counting, from those recent posts you see at the top, VP and Senate, to past executive positions like AG and DA. Another way to say it as you look at this, Kamala Harris has more experience in her first run than Reagan and JFK combined in their same respective career position. These are facts, and they're easily obtainable. This isn't like we're going back to the 1800s and researching some Whig, Tory library book. If anyone should be on defense over experience, it's the Republicans. It is telling that a person, in this case Kamala Harris, can literally be the most experienced among nominees in the modern era, as I'm showing you on the screen, and then still face political attacks and DC pundit conversations about whether she's experienced enough. Jimi Hendrix would not be okay with this. As for politics, the recent Republican presidents versus Harris, Bush had 6 years as governor of Texas. Trump had none, as I mentioned, when he was in her position. Harris has the 21 years. And the point here is not only that the MAGA attacks are false, but that voters might want to compare how polls have spent their time. We have some quick flashbacks for you. A young Kennedy there. He spent his youth in public service in the military before running for office. Harris did public service working her way up in these DA offices before she ever tried to run one. Obama did pretty non-lucrative organizing work out of school. Harris was passing on high-paying private law jobs. Those choices in their early careers are something that people tend to want to look at as voters. And that brings us to another comparison which debunks some of the MAGA attacks. Harris spent her 30s working in that California government in a DA's office. This is before she ran for office. That would be less lucrative than the admittedly very telegenic Ronald Reagan, who you see there, before he turned to politics. So voters will weigh candidates' experience and their priorities. This was a time before the power and the fame were even on the table. Running for office, trying to get power, being, on national TV and in the debates and all that stuff, those aren't the only ways to serve. And so I just showed you the photos, which kind of gets you in the mind. You remember, oh, wow, JFK, yeah, he was out doing the military in World War II before Camelot and all the rest. But if you update those charts I did to include the public service that is not just elective office, and if you ask people around the country, a lot of folks value other types of public service than just running for office. If you add that, the charts stack up even taller. Kennedy and Reagan both had military service. We've color-coded that, so that adds to the prior public service, government service they had before becoming their party's nominee and running for office. Obama didn't have that kind of government service. His total would stay at 11 years. And then if you use that wider ambit, Kamala Harris stacks even higher because you have to count her work as an employee, as an assistant DA, assistant prosecutor in 2 different DA's offices before ever running herself, plus the many other posts she's held before becoming the nominee. So you see her color coding and her total years, again, far higher, stacking, stunting, and flexing on these other past nominees at the same point in time, their first presidential run as a nominee. That's 13 extra years of government experience and builds her edge. You boil it all down, and what you see on your screen is the ultimate fact check to one of the biggest lies circulating about Kamala Harris, and one that people might repeat without knowing it's a lie. That's how disinformation works. You might hear a reasonable person say, I heard she wasn't experienced, I heard she wasn't qualified, I heard she was fast-tracked, DEI. It's the opposite. She has this edge over the nominees in both parties, and it shows, and this is as she approaches her 60th birthday. She's served publicly in some kind of office for over 3 decades. Are you experienced? I quoted the Hendricks line. Well, this is what experience looks like. This is what it looks like. And then you go to the type of politics we live in. Imagine spending your entire adult career after school in public government service, sometimes in thankless and anonymous roles like an ADA, definitely making less money than you could in other jobs, sometimes breaking barriers across gender and race, rising all the way to vice president, which everyone knows is the actual training ground, the most official position that could prepare someone to be president, and then having political hacks and their DC pundit enablers waste time claiming there is a real debate to be had about whether you are experienced enough when you are literally the most. Now, I could stop there, but this is our special report, and we have one more layer for you. Even after this fact check with, again, very easily obtainable facts, you can get information about Trump and Reagan. Imagine, above and beyond all that, that Kamala Harris faces competition of a ticket with Trump, who's an experience I already mentioned. And I'm not saying it's automatically bad. It's just 30-plus years less than her when he first ran for president. And then his backup plan, when he would become, if elected, the oldest president ever, would stack up to Harris's first running mate stint. So this is, say, 4 years ago, when she had 31 years' experience. And who does that stack up against? J.D. Vance has 2 years in elective office total and 4 years serving in the Marines. So 6 years, if you count it all together, that's a wider count for him. We're including the other public service. These are the polls with the chutzpah to not only question her experience, but to literally claim she is not experienced enough. Well, if she's not experienced enough there, what does that make J.D. Vance? Should he be booted from all campaigns for the next 15-plus years? So, I told you this is a special report. It may sound tough on the opponents to this very experienced candidate, but these are just facts. These are just numbers. It may sound like a topic that benefits Harris, and you say, oh, well, they did a whole special report and it benefits her. This is the Republican topic. This is what Trump was first pushing. I showed you the headline. This is what they continue to push in Echo and Fox News, and they add a little DEI when they're feeling really rambunctious. So the numbers don't lie. The topic was picked by her opponents, and yet it benefits her. We'll put it up one more time. The numbers tell the story, and sometimes the top story in the country is going to be a chart, because amidst all of this crap, sometimes we have to run the numbers and show you the facts. And the facts obviously matter, because they wouldn't lie about them if they weren't concerned that people were going to somehow learn the facts that she is this much more experienced.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are 60 days out from Election Day, and if you were hoping that Donald Trump would be headed to jail before then, well, it's not happening. I mean, it was never going to happen really before the election, but it's officially not happening. Sentencing was supposed to come this month for the 34 felony convictions in that New York hush money case. He was convicted in the spring. Today, Manhattan Judge Juan Merchan agreed to delay Trump's sentencing until late November after the election. We'll have much more on that later. There is one pivotal event still coming in just 4 days. That is the first possibly the only debate between Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. That debate will be hosted by ABC News in Philadelphia next Tuesday. According to the rules, there will be no live audiences, no opening statements in the hour-and-a-half debate. Only the moderators can ask the candidates questions. And in what's been painted as a win for the Trump campaign, the candidate's mic will be muted when they are not on the clock to answer a question. The Harris team wanted mics to be open throughout, presumably so viewers could hear all of Trump's outbursts. Both camps see this debate as a kind of make-or-break moment. Of course, the most consequential debate in modern presidential history was almost certainly the last one between President Biden and Donald Trump in June. That debate was ultimately what led to President Biden taking the completely unprecedented step of choosing to forego the Democratic Party nomination so that his Vice President Harris could claim the top of the Democratic ticket. Since then, the Harris-Walz campaign has been rolling. The Trump polling lead has basically evaporated. In fact, he's down in the national polling average now, which is why some Trump campaign insiders recently told The Guardian they're praying for debate win to boost their candidate. This is probably going to be the biggest audience either candidate will speak to. It's almost certainly going to have enormous ratings. We kind of know what Trump does as a debater. I mean, he's been in dozens of debates, and this will be, the seventh, I guess, one he does in a general election. In that June debate with Biden, he was, I got to say, uncharacteristically sharp and focused, at least for the first 20 minutes or so, before he just completely, unraveled. For example, here is one of Trump's answers in that debate.
The Paris Accord was going to cost us $1 trillion, and China nothing, and Russia nothing, and India nothing. It was a ripoff of the United States. And I ended it because I didn't want to waste that money because they treat us horribly. We were the only ones. It was costing us money. Nobody else was paying into it. And it was a disaster. But everything that he said just now, I'll give you an example. I heard him say before insulin. I'm the one that got the insulin down for the seniors. I took care of the seniors. What he's doing is destroying all of our medical programs because the migrants coming in, they want everybody. And look, I have the biggest heart on the stage. I guarantee you that. And I want to take care of people. But we're destroying our country. They're taking over our schools, our hospitals, and they're going to be taking over Social Security. He is destroying Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Sort of a sample. That's like a standard Trump debate riff. Of course, almost everything he said there is completely untrue, especially him taking credit for bringing down insulin costs. Biden is the one who statutorily capped insulin at $35 a month with a bill that he signed into law. But what do you think the question was that Trump was answering there? Go ahead, give it a guess. Probably wrong.
Former President Trump, you've vowed to end your opponent's climate initiatives, but will you take any action as president to slow the climate crisis?
The answer is no, obviously. So even at what you might call the top of his game, Donald Trump doesn't really have anything of substance to say if you move him off any of his rally riffs, right? The border, et cetera, he's got nothing. The longer the night goes, the more off-topic and self-interrupting he gets. We've seen that both in the debate and his convention speech. And crucially, if the moderators of the debate follow the lead of the last one, there will be zero fact-checking of Trump after those wild rants. And so the unanswered question is how Harris will deal with all that on the debate stage Tuesday night, which will be the first time she and Trump ever meet in person. She has reportedly been in debate prep with former Clinton aide Philippe Reines, standing in as Trump, as he did for Hillary in 2016. Harris does have experience in big debates, including in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. In fact, at one point in those debates, when the discussion turned to race in America, and Harris stole the spotlight by calling out Joe Biden.
Ms. Williamson, thank you very much.
Vice President Biden, we're going to get to you. Hang on, we're going to get to
stage. I would like to speak on the issue of race. Senator Harris, what I will say is that
if I could preface this, we will give you 30 seconds of this. We're going to come back to you on this again in just a moment. Go for 30 seconds.
Okay. So on the issue of race, I couldn't agree more that this is an issue that is still not being talked about truthfully and honestly. There is not a black man I know, be he a relative, a friend, or a coworker, who has not been the subject of some form of profiling or discrimination. Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with the neighbor who told us her parents couldn't play with us because we were black. And I will say also that in this campaign, we've also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden, I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me. So I will tell you that on this subject, it cannot be an intellectual debate among Democrats. We have to take it seriously. We have to act swiftly. As Attorney General of California, I was very proud to put in place a requirement that all my special agents would wear body cameras and keep those cameras on.
It's a testament to Harris's performance and to Biden's humility. He ultimately chose her as his running mate after that exchange, which was sort of the exchange of that debate series. And it gave her a chance to debate the sitting vice president, Mike Pence.
And I think the American people know that this is a president who has put the health of America first, and the American people, I believe with my heart, can be proud of the sacrifices they have made. It's saved countless American lives.
Senator Harris, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. Whatever the vice president is claiming the administration has done, clearly it hasn't worked. When you're looking at over 210,000 dead bodies in our country, American lives that have been lost, families that are grieving that loss. And, you know, the vice president is the head of the task force and knew on January 28th how serious this was. And then, thanks to Bob Woodward, we learned that they knew about it. And then when that was exposed, the vice president said, when asked, well, why didn't y'all tell anybody? He said, because the president wanted people to remain calm.
Well, let's get
no, but Susan, this is important.
Susan,
I want to add, but
in.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
I have to
I'm
weigh
speaking.
Yeah, you
So
can have 15 more
I
seconds, and then we'll give the vice president
Thank
a chance to
you. So I
respond.
want to ask the American people, how calm were you when you were panicked about where you're going to get your next roll of toilet paper? How calm were you when your kids were sent home from school and you didn't know when they could go back?
She's a former prosecutor. She's acquitted herself well against the current sitting president and her predecessor as vice president. But she's never debated Trump before, and debating Trump is a different matter completely. I'm not sure anyone has really figured it quite out yet. David Jolly is a former Republican congressman of Florida, Alencia Johnson, Democratic strategist, who served as a senior advisor for the 2020 Biden-Harris campaign, and they join me now. Alencia, this is the framework I've been thinking of. And, you know, Joe Biden, I thought, did a very good job against Donald Trump in 2020 in the debates. I think Hillary Clinton did in 2016. It's unclear, like, what winning the debate actually gets you in some senses, because, you know, Trump, it's like, what can you show about Trump that hasn't been shown already? So my question for you is, what do you see as the goals for Harris in this? Like, you got to sort of control what you can control. You've got a huge audience. You've got an opportunity to speak to them. What are you trying to do independent of what he does?
Well, I want to be actually very frank that Vice President Harris is the underdog here. This will be the third cycle that former President Trump has been debating in a presidential debate. And so with that, Vice President Harris is not only going to have to continue to make her policy positions clear and continue to maintain the disposition that she constantly does, but push back on the dangerous extremist rhetoric that will indefinitely come from President Trump. You know, I think Vice President Harris, as we've seen in those clips prior to this, as well as what we've seen in the judiciary hearings when she was a senator, she is very clear on prosecuting a case. But I want us to make sure that when we're watching this is someone for the first time having a presidential debate against a former president, someone who could not be controlled. And to be honest, his campaign has begged for basically stipulations to sure he looks presidential, and that the Harris campaign has agreed to. And so it'll be interesting to watch, and I'm looking forward to seeing how unpresidential President Trump looks, and quite frankly, presidential Vice President Harris looks.
Yeah, on that sort of mic cutting thing, this is from Politico reporting earlier this afternoon that Harris team worried she'll be handcuffed by the debate rules that were set, again, agreed to by the Biden campaign when Biden was the nominee. Harris had planned to object, fact-check, directly question Donald Trump while he's speaking during their debate next week. So she wanted to do some interrupting herself. Now, with rules just finalized to mute the candidates when their opponents speak, campaign officials said Harris advisors are scrambling to rewrite their playbook. David, what do you think?
I'm not sure that exchanges between the vice president and Donald Trump will be the defining moment. I actually don't think there's anything that Donald Trump can do that will really move a persuadable voter. But I think there's a lot that Vice President Harris can. As you said, with Donald Trump, we've seen it all. He's insulted victims of sexual abuse. He's insulted migrants. He's talked in racist and xenophobic language. You name it, he's done it. There's nothing more for him to move the needle on when it comes to his boorishness. But with Vice President Harris, I think it's less about how she answers or what she says in her answers than how. And look, we know that she will do very well in the debate. You played the clips of someone who is a seasoned prosecutor and seasoned at debates. I think the ultimate question for voters who will be taking a measure of Vice President Harris at the debate is not whether or not they believe her, but whether they believe in her. Coming off the momentum of the Democratic National Convention, where there was this swell of support of people saying, okay, I believe in Vice President Harris as the right person to lead the country. In fact, Liz Cheney now saying, I believe Vice President Harris is the vote we should take. Did the American people take the measure of Vice President Harris at the debate stage and say, you know what, this is the person I believe in?
I want to bring in Mitt Romney's chief strategist for the 2012 campaign and senior advisor for the Lincoln Project, Stuart Stevens. Also here with me, Warren Campaign senior advisor and host of the podcast When We Win with Maya Rupert. Maya Rupert, it's good to have you here. You know, we've been talking about, you just heard Lisa say, you know, this might play to the detriment of Donald Trump, that it doesn't look as though this or any other case is going to involve real court time for him, something he has used to fire up his base, fire up his fundraising. What do you think this means for Donald Trump?
I definitely agree there. I think that Trump uses these moments to try to make himself the victim of these hoaxes, the victim of these witch hunts, and by not being able to, I think, cast himself in that role, you know, but make the decision to delay all of this until after the election, that means that he sort of can't come out and, you know, come out swinging the way he typically does. And I think that obviously appeals to his base. What is actually incumbent upon him in this moment is to try to convince people who are on the fence, who are independents, the people who were tired of, when he was president, having to have some of these complicated conversations about why are we talking about felonies and the way the president is speaking to people. He needs to talk to them. And they don't respond as well to Trump as the victim, as the fighter. They want to hear, well, wait a minute. If this guy wins, we're going to have to immediately turn our attention to, is the president-elect getting sentenced? Is he going to do time? How is that going to impact things? And so he's going to have to take a very different tone. And it's one we have not seen him have the range for.
You know, I think, Stuart, there are the folks who are always Trump, and there are a lot of, it seems, more people who have become mostly Trump. They really like Donald Trump. They might have loved him at one point, but his legal woes that have had such a galvanizing effect on his base, I wonder if for folks who might be on the fence, honestly, does this kind of thing, does the fact that he goes after today E. Jean Carroll, he goes after the judges, he goes back to his old allegations that the DOJ is out to get him, that this is a witch hunt, does this have the same kind of impact it did, even with people who have a tendency to like him or vote for him?
You know, I think what we're seeing is why in the history of America, no major party has ever nominated a criminal as a presidential candidate. It's just extraordinary that the Republican Party now is in this position by its own choice. That Donald Trump, we're discussing whether or not he's going to jail, a potential somebody could win an election. I don't think he is. You know, we have to sort of step back from this. There is no part of American life where people think that it is an advantage to be a convicted felon. No one says, I would have hired this person, except they weren't a convicted felon. So that's sort of the reality here. And I think most people find it, and those that aren't the hardcore MAGA, like you say, most people find it distasteful. It's embarrassing. You kind of don't want to talk about it. But this is not helping Donald Trump get elected president of the United States.
There was a moment, Maya, when Donald Trump, frankly, went after his lawyers today. And two of his lawyers were standing on either side of them. One of them was Alina Habba, who we've seen very frequently, certainly in the courtroom when Donald Trump was in New York. I want to play something she said and get your reaction on the other side.
The only thing I can say that's good about it is the public understands. And my poll numbers, I believe, are higher now than they would have been without it, because the public understands it's a hoax, it's a scam, it's a political witch hunt.
And I want to speak to the American women, and I want to speak to the people that need to get out and vote on November 5th. You must vote Donald Trump back in, because as an attorney, as a woman, as a mother, our future of this country depends on it. And we need to stop this from happening. The DOJ is supposed to help our country and protect us, not attack us, because you cannot win in the polls.
She also said she's been around him a lot, and he's not that guy. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. And I wonder, is that effective in messaging to women?
I don't think that it is. I don't think that just getting a woman who says, this wasn't my experience, so it can't be. I think women are more sophisticated voters than that and understand you can find a woman that you haven't victimized that doesn't undermine the argument. And I think what's more than that is, she's appealing to herself as a woman, as a mother. I think there are a lot of women in this country. I think there are a lot of mothers in this country, unfortunately, who've had a lot of interactions with our criminal justice system. And I think a lot of those families are thinking about their experience with this and remembering that when their loved ones were dealing with sentencing, with how this was going to play out, that they weren't treated the same way Donald Trump is being treated. And I think that that desire to make sure that no one is above the law, that feeling that everyone should be treated equally, that is a very equalizing emotion. And so I think really what we're going to see is a lot of these women she's speaking to who've had very different experiences who are going to say, well, wait a minute, I don't want there to be two sets of our justice system. This is what our family went through. Why should it be different for him?
Meanwhile, Donald Trump spoke yesterday to the Economic Club of New York. He was asked for specifics on how his administration would make child care more affordable. Specific legislation. Listen.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make child care affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. I was somebody, we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that, because look, child care is child care. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including child care, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time, coupled with the reductions that I told you about on waste and fraud and all of the other things that are going on in our country, because I have to stay with child care. I want to stay with child care, but those numbers are small relative to the kind of economic numbers that I'm talking about, including growth, but growth also headed up by what the plan is that I just told you about. We're going to be taking in trillions of dollars, and as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kind of numbers we'll be taking in. We're going to make this into an incredible country that can afford to take care of its people, and then we'll worry about the rest of the world. Let's help other people. But we're going to take care of our country first. This is about America first. It's about make America great again. We have to do it because right now we're a failing nation. So we'll take care of it. Thank you. Very good question. Thank you.
And thus ends the 6th grade book report
presentations. Little Donnie obviously did not read his. Mika, that took me back to, I must admit, freshman year at college, I was supposed to read a book, and I went in, and Dr. Bryant asked me what the book was about, and it was something about the Habsburgs, or I don't know. But it didn't end well, and then he goes, what did you think of the book? I go, not a good book. Not a good book. I would not recommend it.
Wait a minute.
And he said, could you hold it up? I held it up, and he said, that's a penguin book. Aren't penguin history books considered to be?
It's easy to devolve into joking, but Willie, what the hell is he saying?
No, but I'm saying he sounded,
is he okay?
Willie, he sounded just like he was doing a book report in middle school and had not read the book. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's rambling incoherently, and that is who people. By the way, I've just got to say too, because it's a pet peeve. The man who promised to pay down the debt and balance the budget in 2016 raised it more than any president in the history of this republic. Now he's going, oh, because of my high tariffs, because of my high taxes on working class Americans, my high taxes on middle class Americans, we're going to balance the budget quickly, and we're going to make so much money I don't have to even talk about child care.
Yeah, that's the one where you go, you know what? I actually didn't read the book. May I present on Monday? Can I have the weekend, even if you knock me down a grade? Because this is going to be embarrassing. And by the way, remember, one of the core arguments about Kamala Harris that you hear in certain cable news channels and websites is that she's always in the middle of a word salad. Do you ever watch Donald Trump? You may want to give up on that argument. Do you ever watch his rallies? Did you watch him yesterday? Had absolutely no clue what he was talking about, and then brought it in for that landing. By the way, tariffs, which now apparently is the foundation of how he's going to pay for everything, including child care, are a tax on consumers in this country. Conservative economists tell you that, too. They hate the idea. He's talking about growing an economy. We have to finally have growth. Well, 2 days ago, Goldman Sachs said if Donald Trump becomes president, the economy will not grow. If Kamala Harris does, it will grow. That's Goldman Sachs. That's not me. That's not us. Those noted socialists over at Goldman Sachs say the economy would be stronger under Kamala Harris. So, yeah, I mean, he doesn't obviously have any idea what he's talking about when it comes to policy. And you wonder at what point. Even yesterday, we saw online conservatives, Joe, and some Republicans rolling their eyes and saying, what is he talking about here? If you push even a little bit on policy, you find out he's an inch deep.
Yeah, he just doesn't know. And Gene Robinson, again, as Willie said, Trumpers will talk about word salad as it pertains to Kamala Harris. Let me tell you, there is no comparison. Donald Trump, not only in that answer, but in most rallies, he's about 3 feet deep in lettuce and ranch dressing. He is in the middle of a word salad that he can't get out of. And to a more important point, he has never understood. Well, let's just go through it. He's never understood American history. He's never understood the Constitution. He's never understood our founding documents. He's never understood policy, and he's never apologized for not understanding policy. That's one of the reasons why when people say, oh, I support Donald Trump, why? Well, you know, I don't like him as a man at all. He's a terrible human being, but I like his policies. His policies, really?
Yeah.
I mean, there were very few policies. It was gesture. It was 99% gesture, 1% policy.
Absolutely. So, Joe, War and Peace by Count Leo Tolstoy is about war and about peace. And peace is better than war. But war is more exciting. And, you know, it was absolutely absurd. I mean, you listen to that, and he clearly has no idea what he's talking about. And this idea about tariffs that he has, which is wrong, 100% of, or as Donald Trump would say, 110% of economists will tell you that he's totally wrong about tariffs. It is not a tax on foreign companies. It is a tax on American consumers. It's a regressive tax. It's a horrible tax that affects low-income and working-class Americans more than it does more affluent Americans. This was at the Economic Club of New York. I mean, how did those people who were listening to him not just like gag or laugh, or how do they keep a straight face listening to that ridiculous nonsense? I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing when he kept looking back at the woman who'd asked the question, and I just wanted to zoom in on her face and see what she was actually thinking. If I was the mother of young children, I wouldn't be reassured by those childcare policies. I mean, maybe J.D. Vance's policy, frankly, of having aunts and uncles and grandparents, as if grandparents didn't have other things to do and aunts and uncles didn't have other things to do as well, looking after your children. That seems to be the closest there is to a childcare policy. But Charlie Sykes, I mean, one of the reasons I think, you keep hearing from business people who say, well, I don't like Donald Trump, I don't like his character, but, there are the policy issues. Well, clearly, on the childcare front, there aren't very many policy issues. I'm sure many of them don't like the idea of tariffs. They know that this is a tax on the American consumer. Does it really just come down to the idea that Donald Trump has proposed to cut corporate tax rates to 15%? And people in the business community and on Wall Street are prepared to hold their noses at everything else because of that 15% corporate tax rate?
Well, I think it's that. I think it's also Donald Trump's position on regulation. Look, I mean, Donald Trump has essentially told the business class, if I become president, I'm going to do whatever you want me to do. I will give you whatever subsidies you want. I will eliminate regulations that you find to be pesky. I will not raise the taxes. I mean, basically, this is very, very transactional from their point of view. I mean, this is kind of the Faustian bargain. And the question, of course, is whether or not at some point they're sitting in that room and, I'm watching them applaud that bizarre word salad, whether it occurs to them that, this man is not good for the nation. This man is not actually good for economic stability. What we most want is a stable economy that we can predict. We do not want an international trade war. But for many of them, it's simply, this guy's going to do what I want. And by the way, Elon Musk is out there basically saying, Donald Trump is going to put me in charge of all kinds of things involving, government regulation, everything. What could possibly go wrong there? So, if you think the incoherence of the word salad is troubling, wait until you see the kind of people that Donald Trump brings into a second administration. I mean, that's going to be quite